"Don't take it personally," the man in the tailored navy suit said with a thin smile. "I'm careful about whose hand I shake." The words floated through the grand ballroom of the Hawthorne Hotel in downtown Chicago, but the silence that followed carried much farther. Crystal glasses caught the glow of the chandeliers. A jazz trio in the corner stumbled over a note. Conversations faded into whispers as more than 200 business leaders watched Ethan Walker, billionaire CEO of Walker Dynamics, leave a young black waitress standing with her hand gently extended in the air. Her name was Naomi Brooks, and for one long second, she looked at her own hand as if she had forgotten it was there. Then she lowered it, folded both hands neatly in front of her apron, and smiled. "I hope you enjoy your evening, sir," she said softly. No anger, no argument, just a smile that somehow made the room feel smaller. Ethan nodded once and walked away without another word. To him, it was nothing. A simple choice. A moment already forgotten. Ethan Walker had built a multi-billion-dollar company by trusting his instincts and keeping people at a distance. Investors called him disciplined. Business magazines called him brilliant. His employees called him impossible to read. He believed respect was earned, not offered, and that emotions only got in the way of results. Tonight, he was the guest of honor at the largest technology charity gala in Illinois, surrounded by senators, founders, celebrities, and investors with enough money to change entire cities. Every camera seemed to follow him. Every conversation paused when he entered a room. Ethan was used to being the center of attention. Naomi Brooks was not. At 26, she worked double shifts to help support her grandmother and pay for evening classes. She knew the names of regular customers, remembered who liked sweet tea and who preferred sparkling water, and somehow managed to make every guest feel welcome, even the ones who barely noticed she existed. Her manager often joked that Naomi could calm a room faster than security ever could. She believed kindness was free, and because it was free, people should give more of it away. She had offered Ethan a handshake because he had just donated $5 million to the children's hospital she volunteered at on weekends. She thought it deserved a thank you. She never expected anything in return. Around the ballroom, people quietly returned to their conversations, but not before a few phones disappeared into pockets a little too quickly. One investor frowned. A woman near the stage exchanged a look with her husband. A young waiter leaned toward Naomi and whispered, "Are you okay?" Naomi smiled again. "I'm working," she answered. "It's a good night." Across the room, Ethan accepted another round of applause as flashbulbs lit up the stage. He adjusted his cuff links and prepared for the biggest speech of his career, never noticing that a single handshake had become the most talked-about moment of the evening. And somewhere inside that crowded ballroom, someone had already decided that what they had just seen deserved to be remembered. The applause rolled across the ballroom like distant thunder, warm and polished and practiced, but not everyone was listening to Ethan Walker's speech anymore. Small conversations had started to grow at the edges of the room. A woman from a venture capital firm leaned toward her business partner and quietly asked, "Did you see what happened with the waitress?" A retired judge nodded to himself without saying a word. Near the service entrance, a young photographer checked the pictures on his camera and paused a little longer than expected. Naomi Brooks carried a silver tray through the crowd as though nothing unusual had happened. Fresh glasses of sparkling water replaced empty ones. Plates disappeared before anyone noticed them. She smiled when guests thanked her and wished them a pleasant evening. It was almost as if the awkward moment from earlier belonged to somebody else. Her friend Lily, another waitress working the event, finally caught up to her near the kitchen doors. "You really are all right?" she whispered. Naomi adjusted a folded napkin and gave a small laugh. "I have survived worse than an uncomfortable minute." Lily looked back toward the stage where Ethan stood under a spotlight. "I would have said something." Naomi shook her head. "People tell you who they are every day. Sometimes they use words. Sometimes they do not." Then she picked up another tray and walked back into the ballroom. Across the room, Ethan finished another story about innovation and leadership. The audience laughed at the right moments. Investors clapped. Reporters took notes. He had delivered versions of this speech 100 times across America. Hard work, discipline, excellence. He believed every word of it. What he did not know was that one of the largest investors in the room had stopped paying attention several minutes earlier. Samuel Grant had built a fortune buying companies and saving struggling businesses. At 70 years old, he believed balance sheets mattered, but character mattered more. He had watched the exchange between Ethan and Naomi from only 20 feet away. The handshake itself had not surprised him. Pride was common in business. It was Naomi's response that stayed with him. She had not argued. She had not embarrassed anyone. She had simply chosen grace. Samuel watched as Naomi helped an elderly guest find a seat, and then stopped to comfort a nervous little boy who had become separated from his parents for less than a minute. She knelt to his eye level, smiled, and pointed toward his family just as his mother came rushing over. The child laughed. The mother hugged Naomi. Samuel folded his hands together. His assistant noticed the expression on his face. "Something wrong?" she asked. Samuel answered quietly. "I have spent 50 years investing in people. I never ignore moments like that." Meanwhile, hidden among the crowd, another guest tapped a phone screen. A short video began to play. It showed a young waitress offering a hand and a billionaire pulling away. The person holding the phone sighed. "That is not going to look good," he muttered before pressing send. The message traveled to one friend, then another, then another. Ethan stood at the center of the grand ballroom, surrounded by power and praise, completely unaware that the smallest moment of his evening had quietly started a conversation that was moving much faster than he ever could. Long before anyone in that ballroom knew her name, Naomi Brooks had learned that the world could make a person feel invisible without ever saying a single word. She grew up on the south side of Chicago in a small brick apartment where her grandmother believed two things could change a life: hard work and good manners. Every morning before school, Naomi helped make breakfast, watered the little plants sitting on the kitchen window, and listened to her grandmother repeat the same lesson. Never let someone else's bad day become your hard. As a little girl, Naomi did not fully understand what that meant. She understood it better as she grew older. She remembered customers who looked past her mother at grocery stores and spoke to someone else. She remembered teachers who expected less from certain students and more from others. She remembered walking into her first job interview and being told they had already filled the position, only to see a help wanted sign hanging in the window a week later. Still, her grandmother never let bitterness stay in the house for long. "Kindness is not weakness," she would say. "It is proof that somebody else's choices do not control your own." Naomi carried those words everywhere she went. She worked hard in school and dreamed of becoming an event planner one day. She loved watching people celebrate weddings, birthdays, and community festivals. She believed good memories mattered because difficult days arrived often enough on their own. College had to wait when her grandmother became sick. Medical appointments grew more frequent. Bills arrived faster than paychecks. Naomi picked up extra shifts at the Hawthorne Hotel because the tips were better and the hours were steady. She told herself it was temporary. Temporary turned into 3 years. Yet somehow she never lost the habit of making strangers smile. The front desk staff knew she brought homemade cookies during the holidays. The kitchen crew knew she stayed late to help clean even after her own work was done. Security guards knew she remembered the names of their children. Managers trusted her with important events because guests always asked for her by name. One Christmas, a regular customer left a note that simply read, "Thank you for treating my lonely father like family." Naomi kept that card folded inside her wallet. She looked at it whenever life felt heavy. Back in the ballroom, she carried another tray toward the guests. The elderly woman she had helped earlier stopped her. "Young lady," she said, touching Naomi's arm, "I saw what happened. You handled yourself with grace." Naomi smiled. "Thank you, ma'am. I hope you are enjoying the evening." The woman reached into her purse and handed Naomi the smallest thing, a peppermint candy wrapped in silver paper. "My mother used to give me one when people disappointed me," she said. Naomi laughed softly and slipped it into her pocket. Across the room, Ethan Walker was shaking hands with executives and posing for photographs under bright lights. Naomi glanced over for only a second before getting back to work. She had tables to serve and glasses to refill. She had no idea that the little peppermint in her pocket and the lesson from her grandmother would carry her through the longest night of her life, because outside the ballroom, the quiet conversation about a single missed handshake was beginning to spread farther than anyone could imagine. Ethan Walker liked to tell people that success was simple. Show up first. Leave last. Never let feelings make decisions that numbers should make. It sounded wise in magazine interviews, and business schools wrote case studies about his company, but the truth was more complicated than the headlines. Ethan had not been born into luxury. His father owned a small hardware store outside Chicago, and his mother taught math at a public high school. They worked long days and expected the same from their son. When Ethan was 16, his father lost the store after a larger chain moved into town. Ethan never forgot the look on his father's face while taking down the old sign from the front window. He promised himself that nobody would ever have that kind of power over him again. He studied harder than anyone around him. Scholarships paid for college. Late nights and long weekends turned into a small technology company run from a cramped office with secondhand furniture. Friends came and went. Competitors laughed at his ideas. Ethan ignored all of them. Year after year, Walker Dynamics grew bigger. One office became 10. 10 employees became 10,000. Reporters praised his discipline. Investors admired his confidence. Somewhere along the way, confidence slowly turned into distance. Distance slowly became pride. Ethan stopped learning the names of assistants. Meetings became shorter. Conversations became transactions. If someone could not help the business grow, he rarely noticed them. His executive team adjusted to his habits. They stood when he entered a room. They laughed at jokes that were not funny. They canceled lunches when he changed his schedule. Nobody wanted to disappoint the man who had built an empire. At the Hawthorne Hotel, Ethan stepped away from the stage to a line of guests waiting to greet him. Hands reached out. Business cards changed owners. Cameras flashed. His chief financial officer, Daniel Pierce, walked beside him with a tablet in hand. "Excellent speech," Daniel said. "3 investors want private meetings tomorrow." Ethan nodded. "Schedule them." Daniel hesitated for a second. "There is also a small matter from earlier." Ethan looked confused. "What matter?" "The waitress." Ethan adjusted his jacket. "What about her?" Daniel lowered his voice. "A few people noticed." Ethan smiled politely. "People notice everything. Tomorrow they will forget." Daniel wanted to say more, but stayed quiet. He had worked with Ethan for 8 years and understood the rules. Push too hard, and the conversation ended. Across the ballroom, Samuel Grant watched the exchange from a distance. He had met Ethan many times over the years and respected his business talent. Tonight something felt different. He turned to his assistant. "Do you know the first thing my father taught me?" She shook her head. Samuel smiled sadly. "Treat the janitor and the chairman the same, because one day you might need both." Ethan continued through the crowd accepting praise and congratulations. Naomi continued carrying trays and helping guests find their seats. Their worlds could not have looked more different. Yet without realizing it, both were walking toward the same destination. Ethan believed that great companies were built by intelligence alone. Naomi believed that character mattered just as much as talent. Before the night was over, one of those beliefs was going to be tested, and the people watching would remember the answer for a very long time. The evening should have ended with handshakes, photographs, and promises about the future, but small moments have a strange way of growing when nobody is paying attention. Near the back of the ballroom, a young software founder named Michael Turner looked down at his phone and frowned. Someone had sent him a short video from across the room. It lasted less than 10 seconds. A waitress offered a hand. A billionaire turned away. Michael watched it twice before locking his screen. "That does not look good," he said quietly. His business partner glanced over. "It is only a handshake." Michael shook his head. "It is never only a handshake. People show you how they treat someone who cannot help them." Across the ballroom, Samuel Grant happened to hear those words. He smiled to himself because they sounded very familiar. He had spent decades building partnerships and had learned that numbers could predict profits, but character predicted problems. His assistant noticed him checking his own phone. "Bad news?" she asked. Samuel slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Not yet," he answered. "But I think somebody just made an expensive mistake." Ethan Walker continued moving through the crowd, completely unaware of the quiet conversations happening around him. Daniel Pierce stepped closer. Samuel Grant asked if you had a minute to talk. Ethan looked toward the older investor and smiled. "Excellent. I was hoping to discuss the expansion project." Daniel hesitated. He said it was personal. Ethan frowned for the first time that evening. Samuel greeted him politely, but did not mention business. Instead, he asked a simple question. "How long have you worked with your assistant?" Ethan looked surprised. "Daniel?" 8 years. Samuel nodded. "Do you know the name of the woman serving coffee near the stage?" Ethan glanced across the room. "I cannot say that I do." Samuel looked toward Naomi, who was helping an elderly couple gather their coats. Her name is Naomi Brooks. Ethan smiled politely, waiting for the point. Samuel sighed. I have discovered that people who remember names usually build stronger companies. Ethan gave a short laugh. I build products, Samuel. That is my business. Samuel answered with a calm voice. No, Ethan. People are your business. Products are only the result. The conversation ended there. Samuel wished him a pleasant evening and walked away. Ethan watched him leave, slightly confused but not concerned. He had larger things to think about. Walker Dynamics was preparing for one of the biggest partnerships in company history. The deal could open markets across the country and create thousands of jobs. Nothing was going to distract him from that goal. Meanwhile, Naomi carried a fresh pot of coffee toward a quiet table where Samuel had taken a seat. He thanked her and asked how her evening was going. Naomi smiled. Busy is good for business. Samuel laughed. And what about difficult people? Naomi placed the cup in front of him. My grandmother says difficult people are unexpected teachers. Samuel leaned back in his chair. That is a lesson many successful people forget. Naomi simply wished him a good evening and walked away. Samuel watched her disappear into the crowd and then looked across the ballroom toward Ethan Walker. Two people had left very different impressions on him that night. And as another phone buzzed with another copy of the same short video, the distance between those impressions was becoming impossible to ignore. By the time the charity gala began to wind down, the city outside the Hawthorne Hotel had settled into the cool Chicago night. But inside the ballroom, something invisible had started moving faster than any guest could see. Ethan Walker stood with a circle of executives discussing the future of Walker Dynamics when Daniel Pierce felt his phone vibrate for the third time in less than a minute. He glanced at the screen and frowned. Excuse me for a second, he said quietly. Ethan barely looked up. Make it quick. Daniel stepped away and answered the call. The voice on the other end sounded uneasy. Daniel, we have a problem. Several major clients are asking questions. Daniel looked across the ballroom toward Ethan. Questions about what? There was a short pause. About a video. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. What video? The answer came quickly. The one from tonight. Daniel ended the call and checked his messages. More alerts appeared. A public relations manager wanted an emergency meeting. A board member had left a voicemail. Two investors had sent the same question. Is the video real? Daniel walked back toward Ethan, trying to remain calm. We may need to leave early. Ethan looked annoyed. Why? Daniel lowered his voice. Something from the gala is getting attention online. Ethan smiled. People always post pictures from these events. Daniel did not smile back. These are not pictures. Ethan finally took the phone and watched the short clip. Naomi offered her hand. Ethan politely stepped away. The camera caught the silence in the room. Then it ended. Ethan handed the phone back. That is it. Daniel nodded. That is enough. Ethan laughed softly. Nobody builds a business by worrying about 10 seconds of video. Not far away, Samuel Grant happened to notice the exchange. He had seen enough business cycles to recognize the look on Daniel's face. It was the expression of a man who knew a small problem could become a large one. Samuel stood and prepared to leave. Naomi happened to be clearing the nearby table. Thank you for your kindness tonight, Samuel said. Naomi smiled. I hope you enjoyed the event. Samuel picked up his coat. I did. And I hope you never change the way you treat people. Naomi looked puzzled but thanked him anyway. As Samuel walked toward the exit, his assistant caught up with him. Are you still meeting Ethan next week? Samuel looked back at the ballroom one last time. Ethan was surrounded by admirers, shaking hands and smiling for cameras. Naomi was helping the hotel staff stack chairs and gather empty glasses. Samuel answered with a quiet voice. I think I need to think about that. Outside, a cold wind moved through the streets of Chicago. Inside, Daniel's phone rang again. Another client wanted to postpone a meeting. Another investor wanted answers. Another executive had seen the video. Ethan noticed the growing concern and frowned. What is happening? Daniel looked at him carefully before speaking. I think people are seeing something much bigger than a handshake. For the first time that evening, Ethan looked across the ballroom and saw Naomi again. She was laughing with another waitress as they finished their work, completely unaware that the smallest moment of her night had started a conversation powerful enough to reach boardrooms, investors, and people who believe that character was the first thing worth measuring. The ballroom finally began to empty, but the questions followed Ethan Walker all the way to the private elevator. Daniel Pierce stood beside him with his phone in one hand and a worried expression that Ethan had rarely seen. The elevator doors closed, shutting out the music and polite conversations from the gala, but they could not shut out the alerts arriving every few seconds. Ethan loosened his tie and looked at Daniel. "Tell me the truth. How bad is this?" Daniel took a slow breath. "I do not think the problem is the video." Ethan frowned. "Then what is it?" Daniel looked down at the screen before answering. "I think the video reminded people of things they already believed." The words stayed in the quiet elevator. Ethan folded his arms. "Explain." Daniel had worked for Walker Dynamics long enough to know the history. Employees who felt ignored. Managers who copied the attitude of senior leadership. Customer service teams pushed to meet impossible goals. Talented workers who quietly left for competitors. None of those problems had ever made front-page news. None of them had seemed important enough to slow down a company making billions of dollars. But small cracks in a foundation stay hidden until something forces people to look closer. Daniel finally spoke. "People are not sharing the clip because you refused a handshake. They are sharing it because it matches the image they already have." Ethan stared at the elevator lights. "And what image is that?" Daniel answered honestly. "A brilliant man who stopped seeing people." The doors opened into the underground parking garage. Cold air rushed inside. Ethan walked toward the waiting car without another word. Back upstairs, Naomi Brooks was helping fold tablecloths and stack chairs. The gala was over, but there was still work to do. Lily walked beside her carrying a box of decorations. "You would not believe what people are talking about," Lily said. Naomi looked surprised. "Did somebody lose a wallet?" Lily laughed. "No. They are talking about you." Naomi stopped walking. "Why would anyone talk about me?" Lily pulled out her phone and showed her the short video. Naomi watched herself offer a handshake and watched Ethan politely step away. Then the clip ended. Naomi handed the phone back. "That was quick." Lily looked at her. "Are you upset?" Naomi thought for a moment. "My grandmother always says that you cannot control what people remember. You can only control what you give them to remember." Lily smiled. "You really do have an answer for everything." Naomi laughed softly. "Not everything. I still cannot fix the coffee machine in the employee lounge." The two women went back to work. Neither of them noticed Samuel Grant standing near the exit waiting for his driver. He had seen the video, but he had also seen everything that happened after it. He had watched Naomi comfort nervous guests, help older visitors, and thank every hotel employee she passed. He looked at his assistant and asked a simple question. Did Ethan Walker ever ask for her name? His assistant thought about it and shook her head. Samuel nodded slowly. "That tells me everything I need to know." Across the city, the video continued to travel from phone to phone and office to office. Some people saw a brief, awkward moment. Others saw a lesson about respect. But for the people who knew Walker Dynamics best, the clip felt like something else. It felt like a mirror. And mirrors have a strange habit of showing truths that have been waiting in silence for a very long time. The next morning arrived with clear skies over Chicago, but Ethan Walker had not slept well. His kitchen table was covered with reports that he had barely touched. Coffee sat untouched beside his laptop while the television played a business channel with the sound turned low. Daniel Pierce called before 7 o'clock. "We need an emergency meeting," he said. Ethan rubbed his eyes. "How many people are overreacting?" Daniel did not answer the question. Samuel Grant canceled breakfast. Ethan sat up straighter. "Canceled?" "Yes." "Did he give a reason?" Daniel paused. "He said he wanted to work with companies that invested in people as much as technology." Ethan looked out the window without speaking. Samuel had been more than an investor. He had been a respected voice in the business world, and people listened when he made decisions. By the time Ethan reached Walker Dynamics headquarters, more difficult conversations were waiting. Board members wanted updates. Public relations advisors wanted statements. Human resources executives quietly admitted that the video had encouraged former employees to share their own experiences online. None of the stories involved dramatic scandals. Most were simple moments. Forgotten names. Ignored ideas. Missed opportunities. Employees who felt invisible. Ethan read through the comments and frowned. "Why did nobody tell me about this?" The head of human resources answered carefully. "Some people did. They just stopped after a while because they thought nothing would change." Those words stayed with him. Across town, Naomi Brooks was living a completely different morning. She made breakfast for her grandmother before leaving for work. Her grandmother noticed that Naomi seemed distracted. "Long night?" she asked. Naomi smiled. "A little busier than usual." Her grandmother poured another cup of coffee. "Did something happen?" Naomi thought about the handshake, the video, and the strange conversations from the night before. Then she shrugged. "I met a lot of interesting people." Her grandmother smiled. "The interesting ones are not always the important ones." Naomi laughed. "You always have a lesson ready." Her grandmother pointed toward the front door. "That is because life keeps giving homework." At the hotel, guests and employees seemed to know about the video. Some offered kind smiles. Others asked questions. Naomi answered politely, but never stayed on the subject for long. She had tables to prepare and guests to welcome. Lily walked beside her carrying fresh flowers for the lobby. "Have you seen the news?" Naomi shook her head. "I have been working." Lily held up her phone. A business reporter was discussing leadership and company culture while the short clip played in the corner of the screen. Naomi looked surprised. "That seems like a lot of attention for one moment." Lily smiled. Maybe it was never just one moment. Not far away, Samuel Grant arrived at the hotel for a private lunch meeting. He noticed Naomi arranging place settings in the dining room. She greeted him with the same warm smile she had offered everyone else. Samuel shook his head with quiet amazement. "You know, most people would be angry after the week you have had." Naomi adjusted a napkin and smiled. "Anger takes energy, sir. I would rather save mine for better things." Samuel laughed softly. "Your grandmother must be a remarkable woman." Naomi nodded. "She taught me that respect should not depend on somebody else's behavior." Samuel looked out the window for a long moment before speaking again. "I think there are some people who still need to learn that lesson." At that very moment, across the city, Ethan Walker stared at the same short video one more time. But for the first time, he was not watching himself. He was watching Naomi, and he realized that in a room full of successful people, the calmest person had been the one carrying the tray. 3 days after the charity gala, Ethan Walker walked through the front doors of the Hawthorne Hotel without a camera crew, without a group of executives, and without anyone announcing his arrival. The lobby looked exactly the same as it had before. Fresh flowers stood on polished tables. Soft music drifted through the air. Guests checked in and out while employees moved from one task to the next. For the first time in a very long time, Ethan was not there to make a speech or close a deal. He was there because he could not stop thinking about a moment that had lasted only a few seconds. The hotel manager recognized him immediately. "Welcome back, Mr. Walker." Ethan nodded politely. "I was hoping to speak with Naomi Brooks, if she has a moment." The manager smiled. "She is helping in the dining room." Ethan thanked him and walked slowly across the lobby. Naomi was arranging fresh flowers on a table near the windows. She looked up and smiled the same smile she offered every guest. "Good afternoon. How may I help you?" Then she recognized him. There was a brief silence, but no anger in her face. Ethan took a slow breath. "I came to apologize." Naomi set the flowers down carefully and listened. Ethan looked around the room before speaking again. "I spent years believing that success was measured by numbers, contracts, and headlines. I thought I understood people. Then I watched a short video and realized that I had walked through an entire room without seeing one of the kindest people in it." Naomi smiled gently. "Everyone has busy days." Ethan shook his head. "No, busy is not an excuse for forgetting respect." He looked down for a moment before continuing. "I never learned your name that night." "I should have." Naomi held out her hand. "I am Naomi Brooks." Ethan smiled and reached out his own hand. This time he did not hesitate. The handshake lasted only a second, but it felt very different from the first one that never happened. Nearby, Samuel Grant had just arrived for lunch and happened to see the exchange. He smiled quietly, but did not interrupt. Naomi looked at Ethan and asked a simple question. "How is your week going?" Ethan laughed for the first time in days. "Honestly, it has been difficult." Naomi nodded. "My grandmother says difficult weeks are usually trying to teach us something." Ethan smiled. "I think she would be right." He reached into his pocket and took out a small folded piece of paper. "I wanted to give you this." Naomi opened it and found a handwritten note. "Thank you for showing me that leadership begins with the smallest moments." She folded the note carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket beside the silver-wrapped peppermint candy her grandmother's lesson had helped her keep. Samuel finally walked over and looked at both of them. "I believe this is the best business decision I have seen all week." Ethan smiled. It has nothing to do with business. Samuel shook his head. That is where you are wrong. The best businesses are built by people who remember that other people matter. Naomi looked out the window where the afternoon sunlight covered the streets of Chicago. The world outside had not changed. Cars still hurried by. People still rushed to work. Life moved forward the way it always did. But inside that quiet hotel lobby, three people understood something that numbers could never measure. Wealth could fill a room. Power could command attention. Success could build towers that touched the clouds. But kindness was the one thing that could open doors money never could. Ethan had thought a handshake was too small to matter. In the end, it became the moment that changed the way he saw the world, and Naomi never stopped being exactly who her grandmother had taught her to be.